Dr. Elena Marsden stood at the edge of the viewport in the docking bay of Galactic Prime, her breath catching slightly at the sight before her. The station was immense, a sprawling latticework of crystalline towers and glowing conduits that pulsed with energy, orbiting the event horizon of a black hole. The structure seemed alive, its alien architecture humming faintly with power as smaller ships zipped to and fro like fireflies around a colossal hive. Her comlink buzzed, breaking her momentary reverie. "Dr. Marsden, the council is convening earlier than expected. You'll want to head to the central chamber immediately," came the voice of Commander Dax Oren, the human military liaison stationed on the council. "Understood," Elena replied, her voice steady despite the growing tension in her chest. She smoothed the sleeves of her dark formal suit and adjusted the translator pin on her collar before heading toward the tram that would take her to the heart of the station. The hallways of Galactic Prime were a blur of activity. Delegates from dozens of species passed her, each as varied as the stars themselves. A towering insectoid diplomat clicked its mandibles in agitation as it scuttled past, while a pair of floating, jellyfish-like creatures glided silently above the crowd. All eyes seemed to linger on Elena, the lone human moving purposefully through the throng. Whispers followed her, a mixture of curiosity, disdain, and unease. Humanity had only recently claimed its seat at the Galactic Council, a feat that many saw as audacious. The development of the Horizon Key, humanity's groundbreaking technology for instantaneous interstellar travel, had propelled them to prominence, but also painted a target on their back. The Council's demand for the key had been swift and unyielding, cloaked in platitudes of galactic stability and shared progress. Elena knew better. The Council feared humanity's rapid ascent, and the Virilian Collective, in particular, seemed determined to bring them to heel. The council chamber was a vast, circular hall, its walls made of translucent material that allowed the swirling black hole beyond to dominate the view. Delegates sat in tiered rows that encircled the central floor, where speakers addressed the assembly. At the center of the chamber stood High Arbitrator Xyler Vokran, his shimmering silver carapace catching the light. The Virilian's compound eyes scanned the room with cold precision. Elena entered and felt the weight of 100 alien gazes settle on her. She climbed the steps to humanity's designated podium, forcing herself to meet their stares. Xyler's gaze lingered on her for a fraction too long, and she thought she saw the faintest twitch of amusement in his expression. "Representatives of the Galactic Council," Xyler began, his voice a harmonious blend of tones that resonated throughout the chamber. "We are gathered to address a matter of grave concern, humanity's refusal to share the Horizon Key. This technology, unchecked, poses a threat to the fragile equilibrium we have maintained for centuries." Elena stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "The Horizon Key is humanity's creation, developed without external aid. While we respect the Council's concerns, the technology remains sovereign to Earth and its colonies. We will not relinquish it." A low murmur rippled through the chamber. Some delegates exchanged glances, others leaned forward, their expressions inscrutable. Xyler's mandibles clicked softly, a sound that Elena had come to recognize as his version of disdain. "You speak of sovereignty, Dr. Marsden," Xyler said, his tone icy. "But sovereignty is meaningless if it endangers the collective good. The Virilian Collective has analyzed the potential destabilization caused by your technology. If shared equitably, the key could ensure harmony. If hoarded, it could ignite chaos." Elena met his gaze unflinchingly. "What you call harmony is often little more than control. Humanity's refusal to surrender the key isn't an act of defiance, it's an act of preservation." The murmurs grew louder, and Xyler's mandibles clicked again, this time louder and sharper. Before he could respond, a tall, crystalline delegate with glowing veins of light stood. "Perhaps humanity misunderstands the stakes," the delegate said, its voice resonating like a wind chime. "The Council does not issue demands lightly. Refusal could have consequences." Elena turned to the speaker. "And humanity does not make decisions under duress. We stand ready to discuss safeguards and cooperation, but threats will yield nothing." The room fell silent for a moment, the tension thick enough to feel tangible. Then Xyler spoke again, his voice dripping with false magnanimity. If humanity insists on this path, let us hope it understands the weight of its choice. After the session adjourned, Elena lingered in the chamber, reviewing the arguments in her mind. She had held her ground, but the council's hostility was palpable. She was about to leave when she noticed a hooded figure standing near one of the side exits. The figure motioned to her subtly and disappeared down a dimly lit corridor. Curiosity and caution warred within her, but she decided to follow. The corridor twisted and turned, growing quieter with each step. Finally, the figure stopped and turned, lowering its hood to reveal Siltar, a shadowy alien with a face half covered in bioluminescent patterns. He was known for trading in secrets, a rogue informant who operated on the fringes of council politics. "You're either brave or foolish, Siltar," Elena said, folding her arms. "What do you want?" "To save your people," he replied, his voice a low whisper that echoed strangely in the narrow corridor. "The Virilians won't stop at speeches and debates. They've already begun the next phase of their plan." "What plan?" Elena demanded, her voice sharp. Siltar glanced around nervously before handing her a small data chip. "This contains intercepted communications. They're planning to frame humanity for an attack on a neutral trade convoy. When it happens, they'll demand war." Elena's stomach clenched. "Why tell me this? What's in it for you?" Siltar's bioluminescent patterns flickered. "Chaos is good for my business, but annihilation isn't. Do what you will with the information. Just know they're watching you." With that, he disappeared into the shadows, leaving Elena alone with the chip in her hand and a sinking feeling in her gut. By the time she returned to her quarters, the station's alarm system blared a deafening warning. Her comlink buzzed urgently. "Elena, it's Dax," came the commander's voice. "A trade convoy near Earth space has been attacked. The council is already blaming us. Xyler's calling for an emergency session." Elena's grip tightened around the data chip. The Virilians weren't wasting any time. "Then we don't have any either," she replied, her voice steely. "Meet me at the council chamber. It's time to fight back." As the alarms echoed through Galaxis Prime, Elena's resolve hardened. Humanity's survival depended on her next move. The emergency session was chaos. Delegates from across the Galactic Council chamber hurled accusations, their voices blending into a cacophony of anger and distrust. High Arbitrator Xyler Vokran stood at the center, his silver carapace glinting under the chamber's lights as he raised one spindly arm to demand silence. "This unprovoked attack on a neutral convoy cannot go unanswered," Xyler declared, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "The evidence is clear, human ships were responsible. The Council must act decisively before further destabilization occurs." Elena Marsden, seated at humanity's delegation podium, tightened her grip on the edge of the railing. She fought the urge to rise immediately, knowing that any outburst would only strengthen the Virilians' narrative. Instead, she waited for the right moment as the accusations piled on, watching the room carefully. When the floor was finally yielded to her, she stood, her voice calm but carrying an edge of steel. "The evidence, Arbitrator Xyler, is far from clear. In fact, it's riddled with inconsistencies." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Xyler tilted his head, his compound eyes narrowing. "Explain yourself, Dr. Marsden." Elena pressed a button on her console, projecting a hologram into the center of the chamber. It displayed the supposed attack footage, grainy, incomplete, and conveniently showing only enough to implicate a human ship. "This is the recording submitted as evidence," Elena began. "Notice anything unusual?" "The timestamp has been partially erased, the ship identification code is fragmented, and no source verification has been provided." "This is not proof, it's a fabrication." An impressive deflection, Xyler said smoothly, but there was a flicker of unease in his tone. "Are you suggesting the Council is incapable of authenticating evidence?" "I'm suggesting," Elena replied, her voice rising, "that someone with much to gain is manipulating this Council to frame humanity. And I intend to prove it." After the session, Elena and Commander Dax Oren retreated to a secure room in the human delegation's quarters. Dax, a broad-shouldered man with a military bearing and a perpetual scowl, paced as Elena inserted the data chip Siltar had given her into a portable terminal. "This is reckless," Dax muttered. "We don't even know if this Siltar character is reliable. He could be setting us up." "Then we'll find out soon enough," Elena replied, her fingers flying over the terminal's controls. The encrypted files on the chip began to decrypt, line by line. What appeared on the screen made her stomach tighten. Messages between Virilian agents outlined the convoy attack, complete with details of how they had used a stolen human ship to stage the incident. The final lines were chilling: "Ensure the evidence points to humanity. Chaos is our ally." Dax leaned over her shoulder, his expression darkening. "That's enough to implicate them." "Not quite," Elena said, shaking her head. "The Council won't take this at face value. We need corroboration, proof that these messages weren't fabricated by us." Siltar hinted at more evidence buried in the station's restricted sectors. "We have to find it." Dax straightened. "You realize what you're asking? We'd be trespassing in a Virilian-controlled zone. If they catch us..." "They won't," Elena said, meeting his eyes. "Because we can't afford to fail." Later that evening, the station's artificial lighting dimmed to simulate night, and the hallways grew quieter. Clad in dark clothing and moving with practiced caution, Elena and Dax made their way to the restricted zone. The air in this part of Galactic Prime felt different, heavier, almost oppressive. The corridors were narrower, the lighting faint and flickering. Dax kept a watchful eye on their surroundings, his hand resting on the concealed weapon at his hip. At last, they reached a locked terminal embedded in the wall. Elena knelt and connected a portable decryption device. As the screen flickered to life, lines of code scrolled rapidly. "Keep watch," she whispered, her focus entirely on the task at hand. Dax nodded, positioning himself at the corner of the hallway, his posture tense. Minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. Finally, the terminal beeped, and a new set of files appeared. Elena's eyes widened as she scanned them. "These are internal Virilian communications," she murmured. "It's all here: the orders to stage the attack, the evidence they planted, even directives to eliminate me if I became too much of a threat." Dax glanced over his shoulder. "Then let's copy it and get out of here." Elena began transferring the files, but her heart sank when the terminal emitted a sharp, piercing tone. "What was that?" Dax asked, his voice tight. "They've detected us," Elena replied, pulling the device free. "We need to move. Now." The sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the corridor, accompanied by the faint hum of energy weapons. Elena and Dax broke into a run, their boots barely making a sound on the metal floor. The dim lighting cast long, shifting shadows as they weaved through the maze-like passages. Up ahead, Dax whispered, pointing to a maintenance hatch. He pulled it open, and they climbed inside, sealing it just as their pursuers rounded the corner. The narrow maintenance shaft was pitch black, the only light coming from the faint glow of Elena's portable terminal. They moved quickly but carefully, their breaths shallow as they listened for any sounds of pursuit. At last, the shaft opened into an access tunnel that led back to the unrestricted zones of the station. As they emerged, Elena felt a wave of relief, but it was short-lived. A group of Virilian operatives blocked the exit, their weapons raised. "Drop the device and surrender," their leader commanded, his voice mechanical and devoid of emotion. Dax stepped in front of Elena, his weapon drawn. "Not a chance." Before the standoff could escalate, a loud explosion reverberated through the station, causing the floor to tremble. The Virilian operatives hesitated, glancing toward the source of the noise. "Go!" Dax shouted, pulling Elena toward another corridor. They sprinted through the chaos, using the confusion to their advantage. By the time they reached the human delegation's quarters, Elena's lungs burned, and her legs felt like lead. She collapsed into a chair, clutching the device tightly. "We did it," she said, her voice hoarse. "Barely," Dax replied, locking the door behind them. What now? Elena straightened, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. Now we take this to the council. If they don't listen after this, she trailed off, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. They'll listen, Dax said firmly. They have to. But Elena wasn't so sure. The Virilians had proven how far they were willing to go. Exposing them would be dangerous, but not exposing them would mean humanity's ruin. As she prepared the files for presentation, she couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle was only just beginning. The council chamber was eerily quiet as Dr. Elena Marsden ascended to the human delegation's podium. The tension in the air felt like a living thing, wrapping itself around her as 1,000 alien eyes fixed upon her every move. High Arbitrator Xyler Vokran presided over the session with an unsettling calm, his mandibles clicking faintly as he waited for her to speak. Elena inhaled deeply, steadying herself. Beside her, Commander Dax Oren stood tall, his imposing figure radiating silent defiance. The Virilians' plan had pushed humanity to the brink of annihilation, and now the burden of proof and survival rested on her. This council has accused humanity of an unprovoked attack, Elena began, her voice firm but controlled. An act of war. Yet the evidence you were presented was a fabrication, a calculated deception orchestrated by the Virilian collective. A low murmur spread across the chamber. Xyler leaned forward, his compound eyes narrowing. These are grave accusations, Dr. Marsden. I trust you have something more substantial than rhetoric to support them. Elena activated her console, projecting holograms into the chamber. The intercepted Virilian communications filled the air, glowing symbols translating into a dozen languages. These files were recovered from the Virilian-controlled sectors of this station. They detail the precise steps taken to stage the attack, frame humanity, and manipulate this council into action. The room erupted into chaos. Delegates shouted over one another, their voices a mixture of disbelief and outrage. Elena remained composed, watching Xyler carefully. The High Arbitrator's mandibles twitched, but his voice remained smooth. A clever forgery, no doubt. Evidence obtained through illicit means cannot be trusted. Dax stepped forward, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. Convenient, isn't it? You call for evidence, then dismiss it the moment it contradicts your narrative. What's more damning, Xyler? The files we've uncovered, or your refusal to let this council examine them. A delegate from the crystalline Sorvith Union rose, their glowing veins pulsing brightly. If what the humans claim is true, then the Virilian collective has not only violated this council's trust but endangered us all. I move that we investigate these files thoroughly. Others nodded in agreement, but Xyler raised a clawed hand. And who will verify them? He asked, his voice cold. Surely not the humans, who have every reason to fabricate such claims. This is nothing more than desperation. Elena's jaw tightened. She knew Xyler wouldn't go down without a fight. Then let an impartial third party verify them, she countered. Give the files to the Sorvith Union or the Othran Coalition. Humanity is not afraid of the truth. Are you? Xyler's gaze bore into her, unblinking. For a moment, the chamber held its collective breath. Finally, he gave a slow, deliberate nod. Very well. Let the truth decide. Hours later, Elena and Dax waited in tense silence as the Sorvith delegation reviewed the files in a secure chamber. The council had convened an emergency recess, leaving the fate of the debate and humanity hanging in the balance. Dax paced the room, his frustration barely contained. This isn't just about proving we're innocent, he muttered. Even if the council believes us, Xyler won't stop. He's too entrenched, too powerful. Elena rubbed her temples, exhaustion threatening to overtake her. I know. But exposing him is the first step. If we let this go unanswered, we're handing him the galaxy on a silver platter. Before Dax could respond, the door opened, and the Sorvith delegate entered. Their glowing form shimmered with tension. The files have been authenticated, they announced. The timestamps, encryption, and internal markers match Virilian systems. There is no doubt, they orchestrated the attack. Relief flooded Elena's chest, but it was tempered by the gravity of what lay ahead. "Then we need to present this to the Council immediately," she said. "This isn't just about humanity anymore. It's about stopping them before they do this to anyone else." The Council reconvened in uproar. The Sorvith delegate presented their findings, their calm, resonant voice cutting through the din of protest. "The evidence is irrefutable. The Virilian Collective staged the attack on the convoy, intending to frame humanity and manipulate this council into declaring war. Such actions cannot go unpunished." Xyler remained silent, his mandibles motionless as the accusations mounted. Elena watched him closely, waiting for his response. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured but icy. "These revelations, if true, are deeply troubling. But let us not forget that the humans themselves admitted to obtaining this evidence through illegal means. Should we allow vigilante actions to dictate the Council's decisions?" A reptilian delegate hissed in frustration. "Spare us the deflections, Xyler. This is not about the humans, it is about your betrayal of the Council's principles." The chamber exploded into heated debate, but Elena stayed focused. She had one final card to play. "High Arbitrator," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "You speak of principles, yet you've violated them at every turn. If the Council truly values justice, let us subject the Virilian Communications Network to a comprehensive audit. If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear." Xyler's composure faltered for the first time. His mandibles clicked in agitation, and his compound eyes darted toward his Virilian colleagues. "This is preposterous," he snapped. "Such an action would compromise our internal security." "Or reveal the extent of your deception," Elena countered. "What are you so desperate to keep hidden?" The room fell silent. The weight of her challenge hung in the air, pressing down on everyone present. Finally, a delegate from the Othran coalition stood. "I second the humans' motion. Let there be an audit." One by one, other delegates voiced their agreement. Xyler's protests grew more frantic, but it was clear he was losing control. When the vote was called, the motion passed overwhelmingly. As the audit began, the Virilian delegation withdrew from the chamber, their absence as damning as any evidence. The Council's mood shifted, a mixture of anger and determination to root out the betrayal. Elena sat back in her chair, the weight of the past days finally catching up to her. "We did it," she murmured, though her voice lacked triumph. Dax nodded, his expression grim. "For now. But this isn't over. The Virilians won't go quietly, and we've just made ourselves their biggest targets." She met his gaze, exhaustion and resolve warring within her. "Then we'll be ready. Humanity didn't come this far to be silenced." As the Council prepared to deliver its judgment, Elena knew the fight was far from over. But for the first time, humanity had a chance, not just to survive, but to shape its own destiny. And that was a battle worth fighting.